Wow. So just when I was, having a little bit of optimism yesterday about Ukraine and saying, you know what, hey, at least old Joe Biden said no F-16s for now. I mean, that's how low our expectations have gotten, to where if the president says, hey, we're not going to send F-16s to a country that's at war with Russia yet, all of a sudden I get excited that, that peace is on the way. And so things were already pretty bad yesterday, but now we have Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary General of NATO. He was in Norway, I believe, today, or maybe it was Finland. And Stoltenberg is now saying that it's already been agreed to. Everyone agrees Ukraine will become a part of NATO in the long term. So again, what is the long term? Is that in the same length of? Is that the same term in which we'll be seeing F-16s go to Ukraine? Essentially, what we're being told is that Ukraine is going to get F-16s, and they're going to join NATO, and nobody cares. Apparently, everyone agrees this is a good thing. No one seriously uses the word World War III. If you use that word, you're just, you're a Putin puppet. Even though every day I try to avoid it. I turn on the TV, or not really the TV, I mean that figuratively. I open Twitter. I check antiwar.com. I check other places. And what do I see each and every day? I see someone in the West threatening to start World War III. I mean, this is the equivalent of NATO saying in the 80s that the Taliban were going to get to join NATO when they were fighting the Soviet Union. Everyone would have agreed, in the early 80s, that the Taliban joining NATO would have been insane and counterproductive and would have started World War III. In fact, this is much worse than that because, of course, as we all know, Ukraine is a former Soviet Socialist Republic. So again, a clear red line. The U.S. is all insecure and, saber-rattling with China over China being too close to the Philippines. The U.S. is still going over and building new bases in the Philippines, nearly 80 years after the Philippines was supposedly decolonized. And so you compare that to the amount of time since Ukraine has been independent from Russia, barely 30 years. You think that Russia is going to be more threatened by the prospect of Ukraine joining NATO than the U.S. would be by the prospect of the Philippines being friendly with China? Or do you think that they're going to be even more on edge about that? Do you think they're going to be even more defensive? Do you think that they would be even more likely to launch some kind of preemptive strike? And also, it's important to keep in mind that the Philippines is very far away from the United States. And when I say the United States, I mean the continental United States, real America. I'm not counting Guam. And so, as so many people pointed out before, the more appropriate comparison to Ukraine in the American context would be like Canada or Mexico. Or, to borrow a phrase from, now I can't remember the guy's name. He was on Stephen Colbert's show back when he was on Comedy Central in 2014. I think he was from the Atlantic Council, or maybe the Council on Foreign Relations. One of the two, I think. And anyway, he was on there talking about Ukraine. And he was, of course, very pro-Maidan coup at the time. And the reason why he was so high on the Maidan coup was because he was saying, forever, Ukraine has been the Robin to Russia's Batman. And we're going to break up that dynamic duo. And so we've come a long way from breaking up the dynamic duo to now adding Ukraine to NATO, when Ukraine is actively at war with Russia. If there's one thing I've learned throughout the course of this whole war, it's that Putin is a much more sane and restrained man than I thought. A few years ago, I would have, not because, I think, not because I'm some crazy Russophobe, but just, judging by what's happened so far, the provocations from the West, I would have thought that Russia under Vladimir Putin would have retaliated in some substantial way to at least send a warning. That whole idea of escalating to de-escalate. But in reality, Putin's been incredibly restrained with respect to the West and has done nothing. The West is backing Ukraine, openly endorsing Ukraine, launching direct attacks inside Russia, not just Crimea, but now Belgorod and some other cities that are, near the Ukrainian border. And don't you know they'd be hitting Moscow if they could. But the only reason they're able to hit any of these cities is because of Western support. And so, if you told me that in the abstract, 7 years ago, I would have said, oh my gosh, well then Putin's going to, launch retaliatory strikes against Western cities. That's what I would expect to be, the retaliation. If the West is handing people weapons and saying, here, go shoot Russians in Russian cities, well then I would imagine that the Russians would fire back at the West, who's arming these people. Remember, as recently as the Obama administration, it was considered too provocative to send any weapons to Ukraine. Obama didn't do any of that. You know why? Because he said, you know what? It's probably a little provocative to be sending weapons to people who are fighting a war against Russia, because then it's almost like, we are a party to that war. And war with Russia, bad idea. Even Obama understood that. The world is a much crazier place, or I should say the United States, Washington, D.C. The people up there, much crazier, far less interested in self-preservation, or, that's not really the right way of looking at it. It's that they don't understand the idea of self-preservation. They have no fear. They think that they're invincible. And when you live life with that kind of an attitude, eventually you're going to be faced with the reality of your own mortality, because no one is immortal. No one is invincible. And so as much as things have changed and gotten worse in the past 5 years, hell, the past 3 years, how bad do you think things will be 5 years from now? What does America look like? What does Europe look like? Do we even have a planet left? Honestly, at this point, I almost feel like it's going to be the West that launches the nuclear first strike, because Putin just refuses to. They've done a lot to bait him into launching not even a nuclear first strike, a conventional first strike. And he hasn't done that. There has been a lot of talk about a successful, covert Western sabotage campaign across Russia. Who's to say that Western intelligence, because, they don't value the lives of Russians, they're not afraid of nuclear war. Why not give some of these saboteurs inside of Russia, most of whom I think are Ukrainian nationals, so I think that's how they're doing it, give them a dirty bomb. A bomb that is not quite a nuclear bomb, but has a lot of nuclear material and will have a lot of the same effects as a nuclear bomb. Something with plausible deniability that, you can at least surmise might have been cooked up by a terrorist organization instead of a state sponsor of terror. Set that bomb, that dirty bomb off, in downtown Moscow around Christmas time while people are out, shopping and caroling. Hell, you could even blow up the Kremlin. I don't think that that's out of the question. And I think that that could be how this global conflict finally goes nuclear. It could be a plausible deniability dirty bomb. And then once this plausible deniability nuke is detonated inside of Russia and thousands of Russians are dead or irradiated, and therefore soon to be dead, Putin will come out and say, hey, we're going to retaliate, we have to strike back with nukes, and then the West is going to say, what do you mean? We had nothing to do with that. Look at it. It was just a dirty bomb. We have, H-bombs. And so it's not going to be straightforward, I don't think. It would be some bullshit like that, some bitch move. So, with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.